Join me as I read Picking Up the Pieces to 100 Broken Promises, my first published book. My publisher is Tamarind Press Hill. My second book is Picking Up the Pieces to 100 Broken Promises. This is the workbook that helps to heal interpersonal trauma. Since this book is about interpersonal trauma, it could be a trigger, so I suggest getting the whole set. My next book that's coming out this year is to help heal the little girls that's inside of us. If you're interested in a copy of this book, please feel free to visit any online bookstore, Barnes and Nobles. It's at Target, it's at Walmart, it's everywhere. So if you just put in Picking Up the Pieces to 100 Broken Promises, or if you put my name, Yushima Burks, in the Google search, all of my information will pop up. Let's get started. Let's see. This is actually the second time I'm recording because I had my microphone plugged up and for some reason it just came out like nothing. Like I couldn't hear things. So I guess I'm be reading this trauma twice. It's cool. It's cool. I've healed from it. I'm good. My second chapter is about parenting, right? And it just gives an overview of my experience with all three of my kids. So it's just three short stories in chapter 2 of Picking Up the Pieces to 100 Broken Promises. I chose you. My decision to be a teen mother was selfish and immature. At the time, I wanted to believe that I was doing a mature thing, but the reality was that I was being really selfish. I didn't consider the amount of work that it took to be a parent, so I couldn't have known what my parents were going through. I put my parents through unneeded stress. My dad worked 2 full-time jobs to take care of us. Once I was on my own, I understood what it meant to be the only source of support for my child. That was a great duty for an 18-year-old and even a greater burden for a 1-year-old. I wanted AJ. I wanted AJ because I loved her. But my love didn't prevent her from getting hurt. It didn't supply her with food, water, or shelter. It did not keep her from hating me. My love, my intention, my hope for her, and my desire to be supermom was anything but. Love was not all that I needed. I needed maturity. I needed experience. I needed my mother. I needed her father. I needed family. I needed a better paying job, an education, a car, support my own home. But most of all, I needed God. My relationship with God had not developed enough for me to call on him like my dad always suggested I did. I prayed, I went to church, but I had not yet learned to trust him. I was presumptuous to think that I could do it all on my own. I was selfish to want a baby that I could not take care of without great sacrifice. I was foolish to believe that I was in any condition to love her enough. I was broken, and a broken person makes a broken parent. I had not yet healed from the rejection, hurt, and pain that I had suffered. My brain wasn't even finished developing, but I was in charge of helping a beautiful, innocent human being develop. I was a child. I may have been more mature than most, and I did the very best that I could, but even then, I was still a teenager. I was full of doubt. I acted stronger than I was. I wish I actually knew what I thought I knew. I became the best mother that I could, but I was still a teenager. No, I didn't do drugs. I didn't drink. I didn't party and go to clubs like my friends. In fact, I watched Sesame Street, Barney, and Bananas in Pajamas excessively. I stayed home with her. I sang to her. I read books to her. I taught her alphabet and her numbers. I prayed with her every day and every night. I took her to the park. We went on long walks and I talked to her. We went to the zoo and the museums. I cooked 3 meals a day for her. I made the best out of what we had. I made play dates for her and I stayed there with her. I loved her, but I was just a broken child, and that always finds a way to seep out and cause unwarranted pain. If I had waited to have AJ, I would have never had her, so I don't regret having her. But I still cringe at the thought of me not being enough for her. I still hurt at the thought of the life that I could not give her. I thank God that we made it. Though we are not unscathed, we made it. I still can't help but wonder what her life would have been like if I had more to give. His promise, here for the 3rd time, I am ready to come to you, and I will not be a burden, for I seek not what is yours, but you. For children are not obligated to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. 2 Corinthians 12:14. I chose this Bible verse at the end of the story because I believe that as parents, we tend to put a burden on our children to make us feel better. We tend to put a burden on our children to fill a void that we have, and it's not their responsibility. A child should not be brought into this world with burdens. Like, no. We shouldn't have any expectations of our children making us feel any certain way, right? It should be about helping to mold them into who God created them to be. The promise I made to myself and the lesson that I learned from having AJ at such a young age is I promise to put my needs ahead of my wants, especially when it impacts others. And what I needed at that time, at 17, was just to heal, to grow, to learn my life's lessons, to be a teenager, to tell somebody what I was going through. I had a responsibility to myself. I had a responsibility to my loved ones that I impacted by having a baby so young. I had a responsibility to my community to become happy, healthy, and whole. But I didn't know that. I didn't understand the magnitude of healing at that time before having a baby. All right, that was story number 1. This is story number 2. It's called Parental Rejection. Child, that's why I have this workbook. Because like I said, this book could be a trigger. Listen, if you have not done the work, if you have not gone through the things that you need to go through to be happy, healthy, and whole, honey, this book could really be a trigger for people who still have issues and who have voids. Okay, so let me just get right to it. This is the second story. Parental rejection. As a mother, I've always wanted to protect my children from things I faced in my childhood. One of those many things is having to deal with the lack of a sense of belonging. I want my children to know that they are loved and wanted. I want them to know that they are special, to never feel worthless or rejected. Unfortunately, I had to learn that it doesn't end with me. The moment I found out that I was pregnant with AJ, I knew that I had to leave Wisconsin, or she would have never been born. My mom wanted me to have an abortion, and as usual, my dad came to the rescue. We made a family out of our closest friends, and we loved her so much. I had never experienced a love like that. Being a teen mom, I was often confronted with dilemmas surrounding AJ's real family. I wanted her to know her father's family. He lived with his aunt, and while she was stern, so she loved him, but we never had a heart-to-heart together. I did write a few letters informing them about AJ's birth, but I never heard back from them. We moved back to Wisconsin when AJ was about 1 year old. I contacted her father again, and he agreed to meet me at the mall. I was surprised when he came. I was ecstatic when he picked her up from her stroller and cradled her like the daughter he always wanted. He paraded her around the mall. This is my baby. Everybody was like, oh man, this your baby. She cute. Because she was a doll baby. She was like a little China doll. She was so freaking cute. Little brown, little melanated China doll. She was gorgeous. He paraded her around there like she was some kind of trophy or prize. And you know what? He treated her like a trophy too, because he picked her up and put her butt right back down. Okay. Being the dreamer that I was, I thought that he would be there for her. I was so wrong. That was actually the last time I saw him until she turned 8 years old. If I had been patient and wiser, I would not have had premarital sex. And I wouldn't have been a teenage mom stalking her daughter's father. It was harder back then, child. There wasn't internet to do the work for me. I had to become a real sleuth. When AJ was 8 years old, I found Bo online and gave him a call. He actually sounded relieved and asked if I could pick him up from Green Bay, Wisconsin. It was about an hour and a half away, but I wanted him to meet AJ, so I picked him up. All contact that they had from that point on was because of his girlfriend. She did most of the shopping for AJ, answered my calls, and allowed AJ to get to know her little brother, Jacob. I was so grateful for this time. I had never seen AJ so happy. I felt complete, but it was short-lived. Bo soon went back to his elusive ways, and AJ suffered yet again. I could not have been more disappointed in myself. I finally had enough. My daughter deserved to have a loving family. She needed this. I put my pride aside and prepared myself to meet with Bo's aunt. She had not moved, and I was ready to help cultivate the family AJ never had. I knew I would not be enough for her, and she needed someone. Hell, I needed someone. I walked up the infamous red stairs. Child, they had these red stairs, child. My palms were sweaty. I had rehearsed this moment over and over again in my head. There was no time like now. My heart was in my chest, but AJ was safe at school, so it was okay. I had all the time in the world. I was ready. When I rang that doorbell, it took forever for Shirley to answer. When she opened the door, she recognized me right away, and she knew why I was there. I can't remember if she asked me in or not, but I knew I was going to talk to her, even if I had to stand outside in that cold November weather. I showed her a picture of AJ, and before I could say a word, she said, "Is that Bo's little girl?" She knew it was Bo's little girl because she looked just like them. She looked like the whole family. Okay, let me get back to it. I told her it was, and I went on to explain that I really wanted them to be a part of her life. She nodded while I spoke like this. Not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, as if to say, I hear you, little girl, but I got things to do. Anyway, I gave her my contact information, but I never heard from her. I considered contacting her again, but I'm not a fan of constant rejection, so I didn't. AJ is now 24 years old, and she still wonders about them. I was never enough for her, and I couldn't have been. That's why God creates expectations to prevent situations like this, right? I wasn't designed to parent alone. Neither was my mother or her mother or my father. We were designed to have two parents and to share the joy and the burden of raising children together. I see that now, and so does AJ. I could not have provided the father for her. I could not give her what she needed. Even today, I feel like I'm not enough, but I am thankful that I no longer have to be. I give my children to God daily, and I pray that He fills the void that their father-sized holes in their hearts. His promise that He made, and the promise and the lesson that I learned after going through this situation with AJ, God's promise is, though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. That's from Psalms 27:10. No matter who does not want you, no matter who does you wrong, no matter what, one person you can always depend on, one spirit, one being, one entity, one creator is your creator, right? My promise I made to myself, I promised to love that teenager that needed to be loved back then. A lot of our issues with having children out of wedlock or having children is because we want to fill a void. And it may be on a subconscious level, right? It may be a situation where we just want somebody to love or somebody to love us. Whatever the reason may be, children are not created to fulfill our voids. Like, they're not created. They weren't meant to come in this world to have a job to do. Who wants to be born with a job? You're born with a burden, right? You're born with something to do. Look, on the agenda today is to make me feel better. That's not fair. So that's why I said that promise to myself. I needed to love that teenager back into feeling loved and accepted, feeling validated, right? And so that's why I wrote my third book, but we'll get into that another time. The third and final story is parenting in fear. How many of you have had a situation where y'all parented in fear? Child, it's no joke. Okay, the most important job that I've been given is parenthood. Fear has played a huge part in some of the decisions that I've made as a parent. I know what it's like to watch my children suffer at the hands of another, directly and indirectly. I've never felt so powerless in my life as I do as a parent. Knowing that this world is set up systematically to ensure their failure has made me hypervigilant, and it causes me to be in constant conflict with school officials, children's services, and everyone else who poses a threat to my children. It is not a task that I take lightly. I made mistakes and I won't ignore them. Decisions that I made are still impacting my children's lives. Being responsible for another human being engulfs my every waking moment. All of the love that I have in my heart did not stop me from being foolish at times, selfish at times, and just plain stupid sometimes. I brought children into a world full of hatred, pain, and suffering, and I can't protect them all the time. Raising AJ was difficult for me and her. I don't know any mother who chose to be a single parent. I know I didn't choose to raise a child without a father. I met a man in my dreams, we fell in love, and we were going to live happily ever after. That was a story my 17-year-old self concocted. The truth was that I was in pain. I hated being at home. I felt lonely and alone, and I craved love. My dad was miles away, and not even his love or wisdom comforted me during this time in my life. I believed my boyfriend when he said that he couldn't have kids. How many of y'all heard that? I can't have kids. Just let me put the tip in. You can't get pregnant. Anyway, he said, I can't have kids and it'll be okay. At that time, I didn't mind if I did get pregnant. This was the love of my life. Unfortunately, the news of a pregnancy was not in his top 10 life goals, and he let that be known. He was going to play in the NBA like his cousin, and he did not want any parts of this situation. I didn't pursue him at that time. I just wanted my baby. I was young and dumb, but I knew that I couldn't make anyone love me or their child. I learned that from experience. With Mikey, my second child, I knew in my heart that Mitch was not the one for me, but it was the closest thing to a family of my own that I had ever experienced. I was getting older, and having a baby at 28 should have been easier. I was in a different place in my life. I had a great career, I was financially stable, and I was married. Should have been a cinch. The thought of raising a baby with my husband was special to me. I loved his daughter like she was my own. With her and AJ being so close in age, it seemed like the right place to be. Still, I wondered if Mitch and I would grow old together. He did the best that he could with the girls. He didn't have the best example growing up, and we were both winging it. With all the cheating and the lying, a divorce was inevitable. I lost more than a husband, though. I lost a father for my 3-year-old son, a stepdad for my daughter, and I lost my stepdaughter. Mikey was actually 2 when he left. Like 2 years old in 1 month. If someone had told me that I would have another child after I had Mikey, I would have rebuked them. After Mitch and I divorced, I didn't plan on having any more children. I knew I would eventually remarry. It was in my heart, but having another child was not in my plans. I'm so glad God does not listen to my plans. My third child, Jackson, was quite the surprise. Who knew that the doctors were wrong when they said I couldn't have any more children after AJ and then again after Mikey? Okay. I explained that I had heard this before, 7 years prior, and yet I was still unable to get the tubal that I requested. Well, he made his appearance shortly after I had lost about 100 pounds. My husband, Quan, was happy about raising Jackson with his new wife. I wasn't looking forward to the symptoms of hyperemesis grandivarium, but that plagued my life, and it plagued it with my first 2 pregnancies as well. The end result was a healthy baby boy, and I couldn't be happier with my little cuddle buddy. You don't know what hyperemesis is? It's when your body rejects the pregnancy. It believes the baby is a foreign object, so you have contractions that's trying to get rid of the pregnancy during the whole pregnancy. You have nausea, vomiting. You're on bed rest because your uterus is literally in labor the entire time. I had to take 36 pills a day, and I had to stay confined to my bed until I gave birth, and it was miserable. But it was worth it. It was worth it. Would I do it again? Jack was born when Mikey was 7 years old and AJ was 17. Yeah, I started all the way over. I didn't know that I needed my little boy Jack until he was here. Jack is 7 years old now. Raising my son Jackson with my husband of 9 years, Quan, is a totally different experience for me. I am privy to seeing the development of a child who loves and adores his father. Blending our families wasn't easy. At this time, I had only had the privilege of meeting one of his children. She is a blessing. She's beautiful and smart as ever. She is the striking twin of my husband. She's in college pursuing her dream career, and I look forward to seeing the woman she becomes. She's always been respectful and loving, and she comes over and hangs out with us. But because our families are so estranged, she can't even let her family know. Her grandparents know that she comes over here. She has keys to the house. Like, she can come and hang out whenever she wants to. She gets stuff for her birthday and holidays. She come over. She can eat. We've done Bible study together online and all kind of stuff. But because our family's so broken, she got to sneak and spend time with her dad. Child, and she grown. She grown. So, people, let's get it together. Let's do better. Okay, so our children feel comfortable coming to us. That's it. I'm going to get off my soapbox and finish reading. All right. Mikey and Quan's relationship didn't develop the way I thought it would. But it's not because Quan didn't try. When he and I married, Mikey was 4 years old. And in the beginning, he accepted and respected Quan. AJ was in Connecticut, so she didn't have an opinion one way or another. When Mikey was young, Quan would get up in the middle of the night and give him breathing treatments. His asthma would flare up sometimes, and Quan would get to him before I would even wake up. Quan went to visit him at school, and he ate lunch with him often. He took him to doctor's appointments and to get haircuts. His schedule was much more flexible than mine, but that's not why he did it. He did it because he wanted to do it. He taught him how to ride his bike and how to handle bullies. He did everything I had hoped he would as a father to Mikey. When Jack was born, Mikey was not having it, and things changed drastically with him. He started wanting his own dad. And when I couldn't make that happen, things took a turn for the worse. Once he got older, he started to rebel, and he made it known that he didn't respect him as a father. Quan always introduced Mikey as his son, but Mikey corrected him and made it known that there was no relation between the two. I pray that God will heal us all. The circumstances surrounding my children are all different. I wish I had done things differently to make their lives easier now, but most of my life I have been barely hanging on. Hindsight is indeed 2020. I pray daily that my kids make better decisions than I did. I know that God is the only one that can create life, and I know that each child that grew in my womb was placed there and given life by the Creator himself. I hate to use the word regret. Knowing that this may all work for his glory. So I won't. His promise. Children are a gift from the Lord. They are a reward from him. Psalms 127:3. He gave us our kids, and we have to love them and cherish them and do what we can for them. Even if that means letting them make decisions, letting them go, and letting them learn hard life lessons on their own. And it also means loving them in spite of. And just staying prayerful. My promise to myself, or a lesson that I learned from this, is I promise to love my children without placing an expectation on their personal journey and growth. Can't put my expectations on them. I just have to support what God has for them and just keep them in prayer that he will keep them safe from hurt, harm, and danger. And I pray the same for you and your children. This is the final story in chapter 2. It was 3 short stories. I pray the same for your children, that they remain safe from hurt, harm, and danger. And until next time, be happy, healthy, and whole, you guys.